rational numbers, like multiplying integers. Think about this question during the lesson. Two hikers, Ben and Petra, descend from the summit of a mountain. Ben's change in elevation is -1 2/10 meters. Petra's change in elevation is 3.5 times as great as Ben's change in elevation. What is Petra's change in elevation? You can use a number line to represent Petra's change in elevation. What does the 0 on the number line represent? What about 3 5/10 and -1 2/10? 0 represents the summit of the mountain. 3 5/10 represents how many times as far Petra descended as Ben did. -1 2/10 represents how far Ben has descended. How are 3 5/10 and -1 2/10 represented on the number line? Represent both numbers on the number line. -1 2/10 is the change in Ben's elevation. Petra's elevation change is 3 5/10 as great as Ben's. That means we can count 3.5 groups of -1 2/10 for Petra's change. Petra's change in elevation is -4 2/10 meters. Which expression is equal to -4 2/10?
Select your answer.
Now write an expression to represent the situation. 3 5/10 times -1 2/10 equals -4 2/10. Petra's change in elevation is -4 2/10 meters. Now you know multiplying rational numbers is similar to multiplying integers.
Megan's bank account is charged $9.95 per month for an online newspaper subscription. How could you represent the change in her account balance after 3 months of charges?
Okay, so we looking at the $9.95 per month that she is being charged, and for how long? Let's see. It says, how could you represent the change in her account balance after 3 months? So 3 months, we'll go here and we're going to multiply. I don't know if you see it. It's a very tiny dot right here, but that tells us to multiply. Let me make it bigger. There we go. So we're multiplying that -9 95/100ths. So we're going to use a calculator and multiply those two numbers, and you should get -29 85/100ths, and in money that would be they would charge her account $29.85. So that's how you would do that. They would, and then because they're taking it out of her account, that would still be a -$29.85.
Find the product of -5/6 and 2/5.
-5/6 times 2/5 is equal to -5/6 times 2/5, written this way. -5 times 2 is -10. 6 times 5 is 30. And then you simplify the -10 over 30 to 1/3 by dividing -10 and 3 by 10. And then 10 divided by 10 is 1, and 30 divided by 10 is 3. And so -5/6 times 2/5 is equal to -1/3.
Find the product of negative 3/10 and negative 11/30.
Convert one of the rational numbers so that they are both fractions or both decimals. So they are showing us taking the negative 30 hundredths and making them into fractions. So they took that and made negative 3/10 because 3 is in the tenths place. You can go ahead and use that as how to convert to the fraction. So negative 3/10 times negative 11/30, and then you multiply negative 3 times negative 11 and 10 times 30. So 33 over 300, and you can simplify that by dividing by 3, and you'll get 11 over 100, and then the decimal version of that is 11 hundredths. That 11 is in the second digit of the 11 is in the hundredths place.
Evaluate the expression, the quantity of 75 hundredths minus 2 1/2 times the quantity of 14 25 hundredths minus 3 3/4 times 3 44 hundredths.
Evaluate the expressions inside the parentheses. So we have 75 hundredths minus 2 1/2 times 4 25 hundredths minus 3 3/4 times 3 44 hundredths. So what they are showing us is to take these fractions and make them into decimals. So we have 2 1/2 as 2.5, 3 3/4 as 3 75 hundredths, like 375, 3/4, 75 cents. So after doing that, then they multiply them. So 0.75 hundredths minus 2 1/2 is $1.75. 1 75 hundredths times 10 1/2, which is what they got from 14 25 hundredths minus 3 75 hundredths, and then times 3 44 hundredths. Then you multiply negative 1 75 hundredths times 10 5 tenths. You get this long number times 3 44 hundredths, and then you multiply these two together, and then you get negative 63 21 hundredths. So the final answer is negative 63 21 hundredths. Use a blank number line to help find each product. I am not going to show you a number line. What's most important is knowing how to multiply these rational numbers. So A is self-explanatory in the sense that you're multiplying the two decimals and they're negative. So a negative times a negative will give you a positive answer. C, you again have two decimals. So when you multiply them, make sure you include that negative, and a negative times a positive, the product will be a negative. For the next four, you have decimals and fractions. So I want to show you how to change some of these fractions to decimals, and I think that's something important to know. So 1 1/2 as a decimal is simply 1.5, and then you can multiply those numbers, and then 8 1/5. So 1/5, right? We do know the place value for decimals go by tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and so on. So what I would do is actually multiply 1/5 times 2, and then I get 2/10. And so when I write 8 1/5 as a decimal, I will have 8, because that's going to be my whole number, right? It stays a whole number. And then I have 8 2/10. And so now 8 1/5 as a decimal is 8 2/10. That is the same as 8 1/5. Also, I want to show you there is negative 7/10 here. As a decimal, that would be 0 7/10. Simple, negative 0 7/10. 1/6 here. Okay, so as a they're both fractions. So in this case for B, because they're both fractions, I would just keep them both as fractions when I multiply. And then I would just make this mixed number into an improper fraction and then multiply. So this one you would not be able to do in a calculator. So let me show this one real quick. So -3/5 times 6 times 4 is 24 plus 1 is 25. So that's 25/6. So we would do it this way. And then I always say that I like to simplify first. So I'm going to look diagonally across and see if I can simplify. 5 and 25, a common factor they have in common is 5, and it happens to be the greatest common factor. So 5 divided by 5 is 1, and 25 divided by 5 is 5. Then I'm going to look diagonally at 3 and 6, -3 and 6. So 3 and 6 have a common factor of 3, and that's actually the greatest common factor. So if I divide 3 by 3, I'll get 1, and we have to make sure we remember it's still negative. So it's -1, and then 6 divided by 3 is 2. Then I would multiply straight across. -1 times 5 is -5, and 1 times 2 is 2. So then this is the answer as an improper fraction, but if we would like to put that as a mixed number, we're going to divide our denominator into our numerator. So 2 goes into 5 twice, and that's 4, 1, and so our mixed number here would be 2 and 1/2. And make sure we continue the negative. We -2. Let me do that negative in a different color. -2 and 1/2. And that would be the answer for B. F, you have a mixture of decimals and fractions. In this instance, they're easy to make into decimals. So I would just make the fractions, the mixed numbers into decimals. So 2 and 3/4 would be 2 and 7/500. 7.5 would be 7.5, and 4.5 would be 4.5. So once again, I did not show how to solve each one of these problems, but I did show you how to make some of these mixed numbers into decimals so that you can use your calculator to multiply. And then I showed you how to solve B because they're both fractions, and I showed that.